All right, in the last video, we were talking about public goods and how the market may fail to produce them. The public good is defined by its non-excludability, meaning the business that produces the good can't prevent non-payers from getting it. So there's a free rider problem because if people don't have to pay for it, they won't, which means the business that produces it would have all the costs and then not be able to charge and recover those costs and a profit by selling it. The other characteristic that defines public goods is they are non-rival. This means that multiple people can simultaneously enjoy the good. Contrast that from a rival characteristic, which is where one person's consumption of the good precludes another person's consumption. For example, a hamburger would be rival in nature because if I consume it, you can't, and vice versa. But a concert would be non-rival in nature because we could both be at the concert at the same time and enjoy the show. Non-rival goods tend to have a lot of value to society because so many people can simultaneously benefit from them with a small allocation of resources. Again, using the lighthouse as an example, many ships can benefit from the lighthouse at the same time. But the lighthouse only has to be built once, right? You don't have to build a lighthouse for every ship. You only have to build one lighthouse for hundreds of ships. So we encounter a problem with public goods because they often have a lot of value due to their non-rival nature, but they don't get produced because they're non-excludable. So the market fails to produce highly valued goods. And that's going to be something that government may step in and correct. However, don't make the mistake of assuming that all goods provided by the government are public goods. I mean, the government could provide hamburgers, right? They provide food, but food is not non-rival, it's rival. And it's not non-excludable, it's excludable. So we don't consider food to be a public good, even though the government often provides it to people that are poor. So if you look at all the goods that government does provide, a subset of them will be public goods because the market fails to provide public goods due to their characteristics. But the government may provide other non-public goods for other reasons, like food. Okay. Government solutions are typically to replace market production with state production. The government builds the lighthouse. The government creates the national defense, right? National defense is another public good because it's non-rival, right? Many people benefit at the same time from having an army, and it's non-excludable. Once you build it, you can't prevent people from getting the benefits of it. The risk with the government solutions, though, is you get government inefficiency. And we know that markets tend to promote productive and allocative efficiency based on the incentives within that system. Government does not have those same incentives, so you get productive and allocative inefficiency, relatively speaking. That in turn has to be dealt with. But if the trade-off is the market and the government, when it comes to public goods, the market may give us nothing. Right? They might not give us any national defense or any lighthouses. So the government steps in and produces those goods. They do it inefficiently, but it's still better than having nothing. Anytime we get the government involved in production, we have to deal with the government as the allocator. And that brings up a branch of economics called public choice economics that actually studies the efficiency of public decision-making in capitalist democratic societies. James Buchanan did a lot of work on this, famous economist that studied some of the challenges that we will face when having government in charge of our economic allocations. Here's just a few of the issues that we want to be aware of. One is called the median voter theorem. In democratic societies, candidates that win elections have policy positions closest to the typical voter. Imagine a spectrum. On one extreme, you have socialists that want government involved in most economic allocations. On the other extreme, you have libertarians or what we call anarcho-capitalists, that don't want government involved. They want free markets and consumers and producers deciding economic allocations. Well, most people do not adopt either of those fringe perspectives. Very few people are socialists, very few people are libertarians. So if you're running for office and you want to get elected, then you would adopt a position that appeals to the masses, the typical voter, which has kind of almost a hybrid of both. They want government involved in some areas. They might want government-sponsored health care, or they want government provided public education, first 2 years of college provided by the government, things like that, social security. But they don't want government making their food, right? They don't want government taking over the restaurant industry, or they don't want government making their cars or their computers. They want the market to do that. They see value coming from market allocations. So what you end up with is a moderation of these fringe views. You don't get socialists, you don't get libertarians having a lot of political influence, but you do get these people in the middle. And that reduces the diversity of political representation, because the people in the middle have a lot more influence over elections than people on the fringe. And you'll see that today. In the US, the Republican and Democratic parties dominate in political representation. I mean, they hold the vast majority of political positions in this country, and they adopt relatively moderate views, trying to appeal to large swaths of voters. They don't take on the socialist movement, and they don't take on the libertarian movement. They focus on the middle, which means that if you hold those fringe positions, you're probably disenchanted with the Republican or the Democratic Party. But that just means that they're looking out for people that are not as extreme. In some parliamentary type systems, you do get more diversity because there's more political parties. So you might have, in some European countries, for example, you might actually have a communist party, and you might actually have an anarcho-capitalist party. I'm not sure what they would call that. There's various different titles, but that increases diversity. But none of those parties generally dominates in the larger system. They're factions that come together with parties that are more moderate. So, for example, if in Europe, if you're part of a communist party, you might have to align with a less than communist party to get any real power in that political system. Okay, another issue that we face is a rationally ignorant voter. Voters lack the information necessary to make efficient decisions. To say people are rationally ignorant means that they are choosing, rational, to be ignorant, to not have information. And that makes sense, because people are not all specialists in politics and economics. People are doctors, attorneys, accountants, mailmen, grocery clerks, etc. That's their specialty. That's what they do 40 hours a week. And that's what they're going to get good at. So when they're asked to make a decision about, should we expand a particular highway, or should we build a football stadium in downtown San Diego, should we raise the drinking age to 25? When they're asked to make those decisions, they don't really have the knowledge to do that. Now, that is a problem in all situations. I mean, I'm not a doctor, so if I have to make a decision about my own health, I don't have the knowledge to do that. But I can go out and hire someone, a physician, to actually provide me that information so I can make a better decision. If people did this in the realm of voting, then we wouldn't have this problem. But there's little incentive for people to go and hire someone to provide them good information to make good decisions about who to vote for, or whether a particular proposition should be passed or not. Because they would get the costs of the consultation and, of course, the time it takes to learn and acquire this information, but they would only get one vote out of millions. So they feel like the cost benefit is a bit askew. They have all these costs to getting the knowledge with little benefit for what they vote for. So they don't do that. So in our own lives, we do have rational ignorance. But we also have incentives to go out and correct that gap because the benefits are high relative to the cost. If I'm going to buy a house, for example, I may not know anything about how a house is constructed, but I want to know if that house is going to collapse a year from now. So I hire an engineer, pay him $500, take the time to go over his report, and then make a decision as to whether that house is structurally sound or not. I have a strong incentive to do that because I'm going to get the benefit of knowing there's a safe house to live in and the costs are relatively small. But am I really going to go out and spend a lot of money and hire consultants to help determine whether I should vote yay or nay on a particular proposition where I only have one vote? No, I'm not. So rational ignorance is normal. It happens in all of our lives, but there is little incentive to correct it in the political arena. And that leads to often inefficient decisions. Another problem is log rolling. This is a quid pro quo arrangement to sponsor specific legislation. For example, let's say you have a congressman out of New York, Manhattan, and another congressman out of the Midwest, right? Maybe Kansas. Well, the New York congressman wants to get lower taxes on capital gains because New York is a financial hub, right? So he wants lower capital gains taxes. And the Kansas City congressman, he wants more crop subsidies, right, for his farmers because it's an agricultural industry. So what do? Well, they come together and they agree to support each other's bills. So we get lower taxes and we get crop subsidies. That's a quid pro quo where each congressman essentially holds their vote back in order to get what they want. Okay? Happens all the time, and it leads to what's called pork barrel legislation, which is where unrelated bills get packaged together in a single vote. So the New York congressman and the Kansas City congressman come together and they put together a bill that has both crop subsidies and lower capital gains taxes, and then they vote for that bill. You'd be surprised at how extensive this is. For example, you could have dozens of unrelated projects assembled into a single bill that's voted on. In the US in 2010, we had the Affordable Care Act, which was healthcare overhaul, but it had a whole bunch of things in there that were unrelated to healthcare, things like a new runway for a small town's airport. So the issue, of course, is inefficiency because these smaller bills would not pass if they were scrutinized individually, but they get passed because they attach themselves to the larger bill, healthcare overhaul, that kind of thing. Okay, so we have to deal with these public choice issues anytime we move the decision making from the market to the government. Another way of putting this, by the way, is there are market failures when we move towards the market, and we've talked about some of those, monopoly and public goods, externalities, things like that. But there are government failures when we move towards more government, even when it's in a democratic system. Later on, when we discuss socialism, we'll see that the lack of democracy creates other government issues, other public choice economic problems that need to be considered. But they don't go away simply because you have a democratic society. They're just different. Let's wrap up with an introduction to the market failure of income distribution. This is one of the more subjective areas of market failures because it deals with who gets the outcome of productivity. The natural justice proponents believe that income should be based on a worker's marginal revenue product. This is essentially the value that the worker produces as determined by the marketplace. If you have a doctor that provides an hour of consultative services, that could be valued at $1,000. Whereas if you have a veterinarian that provides an hour of consultation, that might only be valued at $500. See the difference? Even though they're both highly trained medical professionals, the market values one more than the other. And that means that market forces are going to determine income distribution. We'll pick up there next time.